Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Update, and this is the 5th of July. So hopefully everyone had a good 4th of July weekend. Highlight of my yesterday was I finally finished my Everest challenge on Swift, and I got my super cool Tromb-like, and I configured it to be my Azure Blue. Since last week, new videos. I actually spent 4th of July recording an AKS, so an Azure Kubernetes Service Networking deep dive. It's just over an hour long. And I say AKS because that's my focus, but it also covers just the overall Kubernetes networking. So I think about KubeNet and CNI and making services available. I cover all of that in that video. So hopefully that'll be useful. It's actually been a very quiet week. So I'm going to really focus on two of the key changes that were announced. Now, the first batch are all about Azure Firewall. And if we kind of remember Azure Firewall, the idea here is that we have our regular network. And then what we do is we deploy that Azure Firewall into kind of this special, it's a /26. So it gives it kind of plenty of room to scale. But we deploy into this Azure Firewall subnet, and then we have that service. So we have the Azure Firewall. And what this provides is a number of different capabilities for us. Now, I can think about if I had kind of spokes. This could be my hub network, for example, and I might have spoke VNets, and I would peer them. Now, ordinarily, when I peer, the spokes can't talk. With Azure Firewall, I could have my user-defined routes for these spokes to point to the Azure Firewall as its kind of default gateway, its next hop. And now it will enable those spokes to actually communicate. If I think about, well, I also have kind of on-premises. Well, then that on-premises, I have connectivity, express route, site VPN. I have various types of rules that I can enable in my Azure Firewall. I also have kind of the internet out here. And so what we can do is these rules, well, I can have traffic coming in. So I can have destination NAT. So I can have these kind of NAT rules that say, hey, when traffic comes in from here, if I'm going to allow it, well, it goes to this destination. We can have network rules. So think about network rules as kind of a layer 4, so the 5 tuple. Source IP port, destination IP port protocol. So I can allow, deny, I can do those capabilities. And then we have app rules. So app rules is going to be a layer 7. So if that's HTTP, HTTPS, MS SQL, well then I can actually control, hey, am I allowing this traffic to flow through? So with these great capabilities with the Azure Firewall, I can do things based on fully qualified domain names if I'm going to allow or deny that type of traffic to actually flow through. So Azure Firewall, automatic, managed, highly available, automatically scales, all within that capability. So when we think about what's kind of been announced for that, the first is custom DNS and DNS Proxy. So ordinarily, Azure Firewall always used Azure DNS. Now I can actually configure it to use a custom DNS, so my DNS servers, the same way on a regular virtual network. I can say, hey, custom DNS, and I put in the IPs of my DNS servers. Well, I can now do that for Azure Firewall as well. DNS Proxy is where I can now enable Azure Firewall to act as a DNS proxy. I would now change my virtual network to actually point to the Azure Firewall for my DNS. So all of the DNS requests from my clients will now go through Azure Firewall. That means I'm going to make sure I get consistent DNS resolution. When I have rules based on fully qualified domain name, for example, I'm assured, well, that there's nothing changing those things. I now have fully qualified domain name filtering in my network rules. So remember those network rules, those kind of 5 tuple rules. Well, now I can actually use fully qualified domain names as part of those instead of just IP blocks. I now have IP groups. So instead of having to define groups of IPs manually, so that he's 10 IPs, etc., I can actually define an IP group as a type, add all the IPs in there, and then use that throughout my configurations. And I can configure those with Azure Firewall policies. So it's at a higher level, and I can apply it to lots of Azure Firewall deployments. It's going to make that easier for me to actually manage. I can also now have this new fully qualified domain name for Azure Kubernetes Service. So as part of application rules, when I'm focusing really on that HTTP, HTTPS, I can use fully qualified domain names. And we have these special fully qualified domain name tags. So things like Microsoft Update, diagnostics. I can use those. They're managed by Microsoft. It's using the IP prefixes for those services, so I don't have to worry about that. Well, now there's a new fully qualified domain name tag for Azure Kubernetes Service I can use as part of my all-up rules in the firewall to help lock down that service. And Azure Firewall Manager and Firewall Policy is now GA. So I think about Azure Firewall Manager is the ability to have these groups of policy that can drive, hey, I want to deploy Azure Firewall, but I want to manage the configuration. I have these NAT rules, these network rules, these application rules. I want to handle these types of configuration on this. So now Azure Firewall Manager lets me do that centrally, and we'll apply it to lots of different instances of Azure Firewall. And those firewall policies that group those sort of DNS settings and all those rules together have GA'd as well. So a lot of great capabilities for Azure Firewall. Another thing I can do that I didn't kind of talk about is with Azure Firewall, I can, if I wanted to, kind of set a default route for traffic that normally would go to the internet. Instead of sending it out to the internet, I could send it maybe to an on-premises firewall, or I could even have a different kind of network virtual appliance in Azure that I would send that traffic to. So cool Azure Firewall capabilities. Then miscellaneous. There haven't been any big compute or storage or networking updates this last week. So Azure Migrate now supports assessments for Azure VMware Solution. So think about what this means. Azure Migrate is this great capability. So normally we point it at a system and it will work out, well, what resources are there, what resources are they using, what are their peak kind of loads, and then with a focus on Azure being the target, what is the confidence rating that I can actually migrate this workload to it? Well, Azure VMware Service it's VMware in Azure. I kind of buy entire hosts, kind of I think 3 to 16 hosts in a private cloud. So you get this kind of private cloud where these live. And then again, I buy the entire host worth of capacity and I can fill it with VMware virtual machines. I get vCenter, vSphere, vSAN, kind of the VMware networking, all in there. Now it does kind of deploy an Azure VNet as well, and essentially behind the scenes kind of uses ExpressRoute to actually connect those things together, because that's not actually in the Azure SDN. So through that, I can do things like the vSphere management, vMotion. It can go and get to other services in Azure like storage, etc. And then if I had other VNets, if I had kind of maybe my on-premises network, etc., and I had kind of an ExpressRoute there, well, what I can do is ExpressRoute Global Reach to connect those things. So then through Global Reach enables me to connect ExpressRoute's circuits together and then basically route between them using Azure. So if you think about it, there's kind of an express route between the private network of the Azure VMware service and this base VNet, but I can extend that to other connectivity. So what we're now saying with Azure Migrate is it will actually assess workloads, and as part of that assessment, when it's thinking about the migration, I can migrate to the Azure VMware solution. So when it's talking about confidence and compatibility and is it going to work, instead of focusing on the regular Azure services, well, I can now think about actually that Azure VMware service as the target. So that's kind of that new capability in there. Azure Cost Management. So this has the ability to have budgets. So I can say, hey, I've got a budget of X dollars. And I can set thresholds. So 70%, 80%, 100%. And at those thresholds, I can trigger an action group. Remember, an action group is a set of actions, normally in Azure Monitor. This could be send an email, notify the Azure app, send an SMS message, call a webhook, create a ticket in an ITSM. I've got all these different hooks. Well, now I can actually set thresholds and budgets above 100%. So I can now have a threshold at 110%, 120%. So at 110%, I can say, you're really over your budget. You can do various actions, notifications. So I now have that capability. There are now more types of subscriptions that support easy ownership transfer. So that's talking about, well, actually within the subscription, I can go and sort of transfer ownership. There's now a whole bunch of additional types of subscriptions that will let me migrate that way. Let's see if I can actually, there we go. So if we look at what it supports, you can now see kind of EA, Microsoft Partner Network, Visual Studio, Pay-as-you-go, Azure Plan, etc. So we have all these new types of actual subscriptions we can use as part of that easy migration. So that was it for this week. I hope that was useful. Until next week, take care of yourselves.